Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Health University, episode 8 in this summer series. Sarah, we got two of these left before you depart for greener pastures, right?
Yeah, I know it's sad.
I'm glad, well, I'm not glad that you're sad, but I am. Um, I am sad because this has been really awesome, but we are going to tackle today a significant topic, not only in relation to athletes and what they go through, but certainly a significant percentage of college students, high school students, and even middle school students. So there's stuff in here for everybody, and that is the topic of body image. I know there's a lot of discussion about it. There always has been, and certainly with the evolution of social media, it's just become even more prevalent of a topic among mental health professionals, among physicians and parents and kids, and so we thought it'd be a good idea to include it. Um, and I suppose first, Sarah, there's always things that we hear or see or that's discussed or highlighted on college campuses. I'm just curious, what's been your experience in terms of are they specific topics that are introduced by people in the counseling center, health center, or athletic department at your school, like, or is it just sort of a learn as you go thing?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a freshman on campus, we have like all these Title IX and like health meetings for cross country and track. And
Mm-hmm.
so part of that was the like physician at school and the dietitian met with us, and they basically explained just a lot of stuff about like the damages of like disordered eating for athletes and some stuff revolving around just like how to fuel your body properly and also like giving us the resources we need if we had issues. But in regards to the topic of body image, I wouldn't really say it was something that they spoke to us about a lot or really at all, but I don't remember too well. But I think that it's a super important topic because, like, so many people struggle with the way that their body looks. And, like you said, in our current time, like, there's so much activity on social media that our bodies have kind of become a trend. So it's definitely a prevalent issue.
Yeah, it sure is, and I think that for a long time the focal point was more of the specific diagnoses associated with disorder eating. So, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, et cetera. And it's definitely evolved into and related significantly to concerns about body image and body dysmorphia. So it certainly has evolved, and I really feel for you all because while um, it was a significant conversation among um, students or percentage of students when I worked in college counseling centers, um, it's really just escalated with the inherent pressures of social media and to present oneself in the best light. So I imagine that it offers significant pressure uh, on athletes of any age, and that this image becomes sort of idealized in what I should look like in order to, be attractive or be ripped or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I also think that it's not even just social media, but it's also the like in-person social settings that we're involved in with like school and I think especially college. It's like you go to a new place and maybe you're concerned about meeting people or like wanting people to like you. And so maybe there's some pressure to look a certain way for like social pressure. And so I think that that's a big issue because we're so built to be comparing ourselves to others. And I think that that can be very damaging for body image and being confident with our bodies.
Yeah, it sure can. And, when we consider the context of a college campus where a significant percentage of students are living among each other, so it's not just going to class and then going home. We're spending all day for months at a time, years uh, in a very concentrated area. It's really easy to get caught up into that vacuum of perceiving some idealized image of whatever it might be, beauty, perfect body, what I need to look like, etc. Almost fuels the pressure.
Yeah, and I also think that in terms of the athlete, there's oftentimes a lot of narratives of like, oh, a runner looks this way, a swimmer looks that way, and kind of describing these specific athletes as having to look a certain way. And I think that a lot of that is based on kind of past narratives where people thought that like I know for a runner it's kind of like oh like if you're thin you're probably faster, but I think that now people are starting to stray away from that narrative, but it's definitely something that is still pervasive and something that still negatively impacts a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's important to spend a minute or two on those labels, right? Thin, skinny, um, and how even among athletes and even across gender, those words can mean many different things. And you know, full disclosure, like when I was a kid, I was super skinny, and for a guy, um, back when I grew up anyway. So I was a teenager in the 80s, but I remember like being dropped off at the gym when I was in seventh and eighth grade. So 13, 14 years old. So we're going back 1983, 84, and uh, back then the gyms were a lot different than they are now. They're not these there weren't these sort of like fufu shishi. Is that even a term anymore? Uh, Fufu shishi gyms. There weren't the Equinoxes of the world or the Lifetime Fitnesses of the world. Um, Back then, it was a big, hot, sweaty gym, and there was this sort of stereotype of what a guy should look like, um, who's strong and big and but it was also a period where like there were where steroid use was pretty significant as well. So I'd be this like small skinny kid walking into this gym, not knowing what to do with equipment, and like doing 150 curls. And like, okay, that's great. That's the way to go. And then afterward they had this refrigerator behind the counter where you could buy their version of supplements, which it was this stuff called Weight On, so WEIGHTON, and it tasted like. Do you ever have a flavor ice like popsicle?
I don't think so.
Oh, I might be dating myself. Sorry, but they were like these like purple like drinks, and I suppose they had a lot of calories in them. So I would buy them and drink it in the hopes of like gaining weight. I can't even imagine the ingredients of like, I would love to get my hands on one of those bottles to see what's in it. But but that's what you do. And like I was always like this skinny kid and back then, and I think maybe even some degree now, like if a guy is labeled skinny, it is synonymous with being a wimp, weak, you know, etc. Whereas if we flip it, for women a lot of times that is considered a more favorable body image. Does that still persist, do you think, on college campuses though?
I think definitely, I think that in general, it's definitely more expected for like a man to be more muscular body type and a woman to be more thin. And even so, like, I'm doing some research right now for a thesis that I'm doing in the fall. And like, there's just so many papers that go into this like thin ideal for females and kind of the desire to appear like prepubescent almost because society like wants us to be more thin. And so I think that it's definitely something that is still pervasive today.
Yeah, and I think that there is certainly an emphasis, and even among like experts in like longevity and um, you know, other health areas. And I'm not, you know, experts. You know, these people know what they're talking about. You know, they use terms like they don't use terms like skinny. They use terms like metabolically healthy, but that's not sexy. You know, that's not. Oh, I want to be metabolically healthy. Like, can you imagine like people on your college campus being like, "Hey, you look really metabolically healthy." Like, who the hell
Yeah,
said that?
that is weird.
Right? Um, you know, now within those conversations of these experts, they do allude to things like optimal weight, waist to height, you know, ratios and circumferences and all that kind of stuff, all those kinds of metrics, which I think are valuable metrics. Um, However, there's a difference between aligning those metrics toward health versus aligning them toward idealized body image.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times when people are thinking about being healthy, sometimes they're doing the most unhealthy things that they could possibly do, such as like disordered eating in an attempt to lose weight or something. And maybe even with that, it starts with good intentions of wanting to maybe better yourself or be more healthy. But I think that it can quickly become an obsession and can quickly become just very damaging for mental health.
It absolutely can. You know, it's very easy for people to get pigeonholed into this line of thinking and become like sort of, it's almost like this tunnel vision occurs where it becomes hard for them to sort of see another perspective or listen to another perspective on what is healthy because in their mind they have this image of what that is and damned if I'm not going to, you know, drive myself toward it. And a lot of times what will happen is that that perceived image and the definition that one assigns to it in terms of ideal body image leads one to risks of disordered eating, obsessing over calories, um, um, food choices, etc., and even exercise, which is risky too, because there is a risk of too much exercise or over exercising. That can become an addiction in and of itself.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times it starts off with good intention and then it just gets completely derailed to being extremely unhealthy for you mentally and even physically.
Yeah.
And it's just not a sustainable way to actually be healthy. And I think that we need to like remember that there's a difference between being healthy in terms of like seeing your doctor and they're telling you that you're healthy versus someone's preconceived notion that healthy is a certain body type.
Yeah, I want us to kind of get into that for a second. I want to back up and kind of, you know, give the sort of example that I've certainly seen, uh, frequently, and probably more frequently, although I never recorded actual data on this, observational data on this, but when people make New Year resolutions and this drives me nuts. I almost feel like in January and maybe even the first couple of weeks of February, that gym should be and fitness centers should be required to remove scales from locker rooms because it's so concerning when you're on a gym floor and you see somebody busting their ass and like working out really hard for 60 minutes or 75 minutes or 90 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever the duration is. But they're working really hard. They're lifting heavy things. They're, walking on treadmills with an incline and increasing their endurance, or they're engaging in a behavior to better their health. And the first thing that they do when they walk into that locker room is get on the scale. And what gets really discouraging is if they get on that scale and they look at that number and it hasn't moved. Or if it's moved, it hasn't moved enough in the right direction in their mind. And what happens is often they get really discouraged by that. But what gets lost is the effort and the work and the lifestyle behavior that we're trying to integrate. And I think that people are at risk for setting themselves up there for anxiety, for depression, for being really just generally like disappointed, and they minimize their efforts, which can potentiate them giving up. It's like, why bother? This is never going to work, or this number is never going to move. And time and time again, if that's their go-to right after a workout, they almost like discount it.
Yeah, and I also think that just in terms of like exercising in a gym, like there's so many things that you could be doing in there that are not necessarily going to drop your weight if that's your goal. And it's still like healthy and you don't need to be losing weight to be making progress. Because if you take the example of like lifting weights, maybe you're going to gain muscle and with that will come some weight, but that doesn't mean that you're like gaining bad weight.
That's exactly right. So, you know, this it just raises so many variables that we want to be mindful of, and we want to encourage students and listeners of any age really to be mindful of um, that. You know, I think about when the Olympics are on. So this is kind of relevant. So the Olympics are on, and obviously there's these just world class athletes, the best in the world, whatever. But they're showing obviously all the stars and everybody in the audience. And during the swimming events, it's always cool to see someone like Michael Phelps have really favorable reactions when the U.S. team is do well. But I think about him a lot in terms of going back to when he was in the Olympics and competing regularly. you know, what gets missed often, and especially among these like images that we see, is the fuel that it takes for these athletes to get through those workouts. Like that dude was eating like what 11 to 13,000 calories a day, and he had to. in order to complete training at an optimal level. But we don't see that. Like, we rarely ever see like what those athletes are eating. Like, you go on YouTube or whatever, and now there it's very, obviously trendy to sort of see like the what I eat in a day, kind of stuff, and everybody's interested in everybody else's diet and whatever. But to actually watch them sit down and eat 13,000 calories a day, that's a lot of work. That is an incredible amount of work. So it's the fuel part that often gets missed as well, which is absolutely necessary for optimal health and optimal fitness, whatever that uniquely means to you and, to anybody.
Yeah, and like I feel like I definitely heard about that Michael Phelps diet thing.
Ah,
And like, I mean, I'm a distance runner, and so I know that like if I am hungry at any point during the day, I need to eat something because otherwise I'm going to feel awful the next day when I go to run. And I've gotten to a point where like I know that I'm healthy. I know that I need to eat that food if I'm hungry because there's no reason in me sticking to some 3 meal a day standard when I might need more because I'm working out more and burning more calories. And it's just something that I think people need to get more accustomed to doing because when you're an athlete, you can't be just eating like the average person who isn't really doing anything. Like, you need to be eating more. And I think that a lot of times people don't really associate eating more as like a good thing. But whenever I go to my doctors, I'm like, yeah, like I eat a good amount of meals a day. And they're like, yeah, that's a good sign that your metabolism is working properly. And
mm-hmm.
so I know that it's healthy for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to highlight while we're on the topic of food and calories and things like that. It's certainly a slippery slope in terms of a topic because there's so much misinformation out there about diets, and people are influencers with millions of followers are out there, being these champions of these certain diets that more often than not have worked for them individually, but and they throw this information out there, and good for them, I guess. But to then create this message that you ought to do it too in any way, shape, or form is just hazardous. And I think people fall into that trap. Um, and in particular, if that individual has an aesthetically pleasing build, and in our minds we see that, now we hear it and we think, oh, I can do that too, or I should do that too. That's a really dangerous spot. And the far majority of the time, they're not nutrition experts, which calls for us to be really, really diligent about awareness of who we're listening to, what their credentials are, and what they're not. Are you just listening to a personal story or some like anecdote that like worked for me? I mean, nice, inspiring maybe, but an authority? No way. No way. That's I wouldn't. I would be cautious to align myself with that one perspective without doing my homework and my research on like, well, is this what this person is saying is actually accurate? Too risky.
Yeah. And I think that you have a good point there where there's so many people on social media who people who follow them will fall into the trap of being like, oh, like, what do you eat in a day? so that I can look like you. And I think that that's very damaging just because we're not all programmed to look the same way. And like we've been saying, it's maybe not healthy.
No, nor are our bodies uniquely aligned with particular diets. Like there's really no such thing as a one diet fits all. It just doesn't exist. Like, you and I have talked off air, like, oh no, I did some testing and never knew it, but like, I don't know, apparently, like, I have a gluten sensitivity, like, across the board. Every freaking gluten protein there is, I'm like, red, red, red. And then, the suggestion for me is like, dude, don't eat gluten or completely minimize it. Seek out other options. But for you, you might not have that. Or somebody else, they might not have that. So I don't know, my choices are going to be different. Um, I think that's very important to be aware of. The other thing I would urge people to consider is like when you watch those videos or see those images, if I was one of those people and I was saying like, hey, like do Dr. Joel's diet, like these are, this is how I eat or whatever. And then behind me, I have like a whole like wall of supplements that I'm trying to sell you. Really like be mindful of that because there's another agenda entirely there.
Yeah, and also, I know we've touched on this before, but when someone is posting on social media about these things, they're really never including the full image. And even if someone posts like, oh, what I eat in a day video, they might not actually be finishing that meal. There might be other things that they missed out. And there's just so much stuff that you don't actually know about it or about their journey. And there's definitely some other habits that could be at play that they don't record, such as like a disordered eating habit or some supplements. And I also know that a lot of like men on TikTok who are posting for like gym videos or something, like some of them are very open about using steroids, but some of them are not. So,
Yeah, they do. And again, like what the risk is that if I'm a young person and I'm watching that particular video with again an aesthetically, pleasing body, and that person has X number of followers, there's almost this sequence that occurs that becomes more and more inviting for me to join the ranks and to do it this person's way, who I can assure you is not an expert. And they've also, especially at a young age, and this is not bashing like young people and kind of getting after their health, like I'm all for it. But if you're 18, 19, 20 years old and you're posting said videos and sort of urging people to follow suit, you also have no longitudinal data either. So yes, I could see your workout. Yes, I could see the food that you eat. Yes, you can name your supplements. But you showing me your blood work? Are you showing me any other health metrics? Probably not. And that's really concerning because the proof is in the pudding there. And I don't know anybody that's really doing that on social media where they're like, hey, I've been doing this, I've been doing this, I've been doing this. Here's my blood work. Uh-oh. Be mindful of that. And while we're on the topic of steroids and supplements in general, I mean, steroids, yes, you can see a physician and be prescribed them. The supplement world is unregulated. If I, and look, I did this, right? So if I wanted to, Sarah, by the end of today, I could contract with a company that's a co-distributor, create a Dr. Joel's plant protein powder. And if I had, I don't know, maybe it's $15,000, I could start my own supplement line. It's that easy.
Yeah, and they like, I mean, I know I've been told this by so many people, it's just like you really don't actually know what's in them,
No,
and there's no way of knowing.
that's exactly right. And I'm not going to list them, but like I do take supplements, but not a lot. And those that I do take, I look very, very, very hard into the companies, where they source their products from, who's on the board of directors, et cetera. I know it's a pain in the ass to do that because it's so easy to walk into, whatever store you're in, and Vitamin Shop or whatever, or GNC, and pick up whatever product they're selling or is on sale. But where is it sourced? You know,
Yeah, and I also think that going into like alternative measures to maintain health is just really not a great way of approaching it because there's so many other avenues that we can go down that are going to be more healthy. And like, I think that there obviously is something to be said about maybe feeling a need to use alternate measures and kind of just that maybe nothing else has worked for you and like you're feeling hopeless. But I think that there just needs to be some caution in regarding these unregulated or unsafe measures.
yes, which calls to action the need for us to be not only diligent about like who we listen to, but who we align ourselves to work with when we're discovering, well, this didn't work, this didn't work, this didn't work. So let me try to work with a personal trainer. Let me work with a nutrition consultant. I would strongly, it's probably a light word, urge you to think, for listeners to think, if you're a parent, for your kid, or if you're a student, think of it this way. Think of it as, you interviewing that potential individual that you're going to work with, whether it's a personal trainer or whether it's a nutritionist or someone who has a nutrition certification, uh, even a physician. And I know that sounds kind of weird because we're kind of conditioned to say, well, they're a doctor, they know. But by and large, like the far majority of physicians, and this is not knocking them, it's more knocking the curriculum, have zero experience and knowledge in nutrition science, like none. And so if they're prescribing certain diets, ask why. Ask those questions. Personal trainers, are susceptible to just saying like, okay, let's increase your protein. Let's make sure your macros are all aligned. Like, yeah, well, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean? And again, this is not to bash the personal training industry, but um, it's really not difficult to become a certified personal trainer. I did it in 3 months, and the agency that certified me, which is one of the top certifying agencies in the country for certified personal trainers. At that time, I don't know if it's changed, and this back in 2011 when I got certified, did not require me to set foot in a gym. So I could study from a book, take a practice test, go to a testing place, take the test. I learned my score, got insurance, and I was a certified personal trainer. That's the process, or was. That's terrifying. There was sort of a how to lift a kettlebell or how to like effectively, do a squat or what muscles were involved. And that's lovely information. But there was no practicum, apprenticeship, internship experience necessary at all.
Yeah, and I think too that with working with people such as like a trainer or a dietitian or nutritionist and even a doctor, I think it's really important to establish some, I guess, like maybe boundaries or just awareness of kind of how they are speaking about like fitness and health and kind of the words that they're using because sometimes they might say something that could rub you the wrong way and maybe cause some mental questioning of your own fitness. And that could lead you down a pretty bad path with your body image. And I also just think that, especially if you're working with a nutritionist or dietitian, to make sure that you're really like matched up with a good person who's going to understand what you need and also not really kind of endorse some bad like eating behaviors because I mean I've worked with a bunch of nutritionists over the years and I think that sometimes they get into like this mindset of focusing on weight, which I don't think is very useful in terms of staying healthy.
Right. Because we are aware of other metrics that are as important, um, or sometimes even maybe more important, depending on what a person's weight is. But I agree with you. I think it's really important for consumers who want to be clients of those professionals to interview them. Again, like going back to that whole concept of like, well, how do you give me an example of how you work with people, or um, you know, is it more collaborative, or are you trying to kind of align me with a particular diet or you know approach or relationship with food? I think the same thing goes with trainers too, in terms of the language that they use. As a parent, I have a daughter who's 14 and an athlete, and who would probably be quite upset knowing that I was talking about her on this podcast, but she probably doesn't listen, so it's okay. Um, she's been, in gyms since she was a little kid, and um, she wanted to work out with a trainer, probably because she thought it was cool when she was in first grade. And I said, okay. And then again in like third or fourth grade as well. But when I sat with, and I urge parents to do this too, sit with the trainer, the potential trainer, ask about what language they use with kids. So I asked quite frankly, uh, do you use the word skinny when you're working with clients, especially kids? And the answer to that, thankfully, was no. And because we don't use those words at home, and I'm not trying to tell people how to run their houses, but we use words like strength and agility, and we want strong bodies, and we avoid those words that again are aligned with potential body image distortion, and sort of following those people.
Yeah, I also think that like it's really good to be viewing food if you're an athlete as like fuel. And I know we
Yeah.
talked about this, but I think also viewing food as something that is enjoyable. Like you had touched on this before that like you can have too much of a good thing kind of. And I think that in regards to eating behaviors with athletes, sometimes they could still be eating enough, but it might be that they're only having healthy food or just like kind of developing some maladaptive habits towards what they put in their body. And I think that there's obviously some merit to wanting to eat healthy, but we need to not be so obsessive about it. And I think that it's healthy to like give yourself a break sometimes from eating too healthy.
Absolutely. I mean, if the I would think of it more maybe like on a percentage term, like if even loose percentages, even sort of like not numbers, but more like yeah, for most of the week, I eat healthy, or yeah, 85% of the time I eat healthy, and when I'm out with my friends, I'll have pizza or wings or I don't know whatever. Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think that's that's creating a healthy relationship, with food that isn't aligned with so much pressure and so much scrutiny over every little thing that we eat. Um, because again, that can lead people into um, that rabbit hole as well.
Yeah, and I think that it's just a better way of, I mean, like you said this, just having a better relationship with food and eating. Because at the end of the day, like, it's first of all necessary for life. And second of all, like, there's so much good food out there, we should be able to enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely. And a variety of healthy food is really really good. And we're learning more and more about the relationship between gut biome, gut health, brain health, mental health. All of that counts. And look, this is not just specific to athletes too, because students are challenged not necessarily by athletic endurance, but they are challenged for academic endurance and everything that goes with it. Reading endurance, writing endurance, sitting with challenging math problems, etc. And it's all performance. Like I'm going to go take tests. I'm going to give a presentation. I'm going to, write a paper. I'm going to do an interview, whatever it is. Those are all performance moments. So it's important for students to develop healthy relationships with food as well, and also see it as fuel. It's fueling performance. It's fueling health, and not necessarily by what we define health as through our eyes, um, in a picture of someone else. So appearance is, often not a great predictor of what good health is. Going back to, you know, um, young guys who, if they're like young teenagers that are like really like ripped, there's this. I think we're socialized to think like, oh, that dude's really healthy. Look at him, he's really really healthy. He's ripped. He's really healthy. That's tricky, because they might be using a variety of supplements that are actually unhealthy. They might be eating and then cutting weight, which throws their body brain like way out of whack. So we want to be really careful of how we define health, and not sort of anchor ourselves onto just the visual aesthetic.
Yeah, and I think that going off of that, it's just super important to be focused on ourselves. And I think that we need to try and let go of the comparison aspect and also just like letting go of what society expects us to look like and really be confident in our own bodies and be resistant to anyone who might make a comment that could be negative about your body.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, Sarah, I agree with you. I think it's a really excellent point, and just for everybody to think of themselves as sort of like we're evolving. You know, we're constantly evolving. We're constantly learning about ourselves, what works for our bodies, what doesn't, what we're fueled best by, and other things not by. So um, be open to that idea of development, of evolving, of learning. Like you're constantly like doing that. You're going to do that for your whole life, right? Um, and lastly, we just want to emphasize the importance of surrounding yourself with really knowledgeable people and information. And if you are following people, just be really, really diligent about knowing their credentials, knowing what their agenda is. Are they there to provide you with really solid, fair information that's accurate, or are they leaning toward one side and trying to sell you something? Um, and you know, when in doubt, ask, and ask other professionals that are knowledgeable in it.
Yeah, and also I think just to go off of that, like surround yourself with people who are going to make you feel good about yourself and aren't going to bring you down. And if there's people on social media that you're following and you find that they're making you feel bad about yourself or you're constantly comparing yourself to them, then it might be a good idea to unfollow them.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree. If you're following someone that every time you're on that site and you see their pictures of their progress or their workout of the day or whatever how they post, and you feel negative about yourself and not inspired, again, I would avoid that as well. It's a great point. Um, Good stuff today, Sarah, and you know, thanks for everybody for tuning in, and looking forward to our next and sadly our last podcast with Sarah for the summer. So we'll do that next week. But thanks everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to share the episodes, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks. Good.
Yep, I thought that was good.
Yeah, it's a big topic,
Yeah.
but good stuff. I hope you have a super awesome weekend. And are you able to talk at 11 again on Monday?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, let me just write that in. All right, and I will send you money this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, have a great weekend, Sarah.
You too.
See
Bye.
ya.